Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Therapy Today. I've got a really special guest on the channel today for our podcast. This is Maria Laughton. She is a marriage and family therapist who has her own independent practice and has made a specialty out of working with narcissism, a growing trend in mental health as people talk about narcissism. And we're here on the back end of my reaction videos. I felt a little out of my depth when it came to some of the comments that you all were sharing about your experiences with narcissistic family members and estrangement. So I decided I would bring in an expert, and that's why Maria is here today. So Maria, thank you so much for joining me on this channel.
Thank you for having me. This has become quite a hot topic.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of misconceptions, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you coming here to set the record straight. So how did you get into studying and working with narcissism as a topic?
Well, I heard the word, just being in mental health for over a decade, and you just hear the word, and the word is so overused and so often misused. So I didn't pay as much attention to it as I probably should have. But if I'm being honest, there's no greater source of study and research that can measure up to direct personal experience. So yes, I have been personally affected by narcissism in relationships. It can be very hard to recognize when you're in it because the narcissist is so very skilled in their craft of psychological manipulation. I guess I would consider myself an empath, probably reached the level of being codependent, and empaths or any kind of compassionate people are their target. Since they know that they can play on their sensitivity and their caring nature, and they can convince anyone who's that sensitive or empathic, to put the narcissist's needs ahead of their own, right? So being an admitted codependent person, I began hearing more about the concept of codependent narcissist dance or dynamic. So I don't know if you've heard of this, but there is a phenomenon out there of the codependent narcissist dance. And I'm like, okay, well, pretty sure I'm codependent. I wouldn't have gotten into this field of counseling if I didn't care about people who wasn't empathic. So I was like, okay. So when I started looking into this, what is this dynamic, this codependent narcissist dynamic? It is basically like a never-ending cycle of the codependent giving, because the codependent wants to give, right?
Sure.
And the narcissist taking.
Yeah.
It's like they feed each other's needs in the most toxic, complex way. And so once I was able to recognize this in myself, it became rocket fuel motivation to use my experience to help clients. So once you truly understand the pathology and the behaviors of a true narcissist personality type, because that's what it is, it's an actual personality type, you start to see the common threads in how it looks and acts the same, as well as the toll that it takes on a person being used to feed their supply. And so I guess that's my really long-winded answer is my mess became my message. My personal experience became motivation for me to help clients. And you see similar effects when you do what I do and you work with so many people in a relational systemic component. You start to see similar effects of how narcissistic relationships, they affect a person's sense of self and the quality of their relationships.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. So it sounds like, you have some personal experience as well as your professional training and experience to rely on as you're talking about narcissism. So what are some of the signs that you or maybe someone else might look for to diagnose somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, or even just recognizing the pattern that you're talking about?
Oh gosh, there's a lot, and there are some that are obvious, and there are some that aren't so obvious. One of the first signs is, I would say, an overwhelming sense of self-importance.
Okay.
As a starter, there's little nuances, like things that aren't so obvious, like they don't tend to make the same kind of eye contact that you and I would make. They're not really looking, they're not interested in you as a person. You have to understand, someone who is narcissistic personality type, they don't see people, as humans. They see people as objects to fill their supply. And what I mean by supply, for those that are sort of new to the topic, is anything that feeds their ego.
Okay.
Their sense of importance. So praise, validation, appreciation. And so I guess knowing that as a basis, like this is how they view people, as objects. And so where it comes out in subtle ways is, unless you're a candidate to feed their supply, they don't see you. You don't exist. And so I've heard similar reports from people where they've met the same person over and over again and they have no recollection. Like, they've introduced themselves. Hi, I'm so-and-so. Well, unless you're a candidate for their supply, they don't see you. And so you'll notice, wait, I've met you several times before. You don't remember me? No. So subtle things like they don't really make eye contact. They look sort of aside you, around you, never really at you. Conversations are never two ways with a narcissist.
Okay.
They tend to talk about themselves and go on and on and on. They don't ask questions. They're not interested in getting to know you as a person. They're interested in talking about themselves. So those are like slight, not so obvious. So it's an overall sense of self-importance combined with a complete lack of regard for others as actual humans. They don't have any internal value. They have no internal sense of self. So you almost have to picture like a person with an empty soul, like nothing is in it. And so all of their value comes from the external. That's what I refer to as supply. The two, what I would say most distinctive, I mean, with all that in mind, most distinctive features of somebody that has this personality type is they do not have the ability to take accountability for what they do and say. Okay. They can't. It's like almost a capacity. They can't see themselves as ever at fault or ever the cause. It's always someone else's doing or fault. So a lack of ability, real ability to have any accountability. And then no regard for other people's feelings, no ability to have empathy or compassion for other people's feelings. Those are the two sort of definitive markers.
Well, now I'm very self-conscious of my eye contact as we're...
Don't worry, I can already tell. The fact that you've listened to me this long without interjecting about yourself tells me. So no, I mean, it's subtle, but you will notice it. And once you study it, it's like you it's almost like I wish I was better off when I was asleep and I wasn't aware, because now you can't unsee it, and you can't now that you know, like when you know, it's very hard to overlook. But yeah, no, you're definitely, I don't want to make you paranoid. People have tendencies, but there's a big difference between tendencies and what I'm talking about, which is true pathology, a personality type.
And I think that's really interesting. What you're talking about is that those kinds of things like the eye contact, I don't know how much that actually shows up in research, but what you're talking about is like that experience that once you have seen it multiple times, you notice these behavioral patterns that maybe doesn't show up in a research article. Exactly,
because they're subtle, and until you've experienced it firsthand, you don't recognize it. You just think the person's distracted,
sure,
or kind of rude, or just not interested. But again, you just see almost the exact same patterns repeat with somebody that does have this personality type. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So I know you said earlier that you had watched this Estranged Parents YouTube video that kind of sparked this curiosity and this opportunity for me to learn. Would you label that mother a narcissist, and why or why not?
First of all, I'm very careful with labels. I really don't like labels. I think they can be a little bit too narrow, although we are sitting here today talking about people that have the label of narcissism. So I actually watched it twice because I wanted to be very thorough and careful. So this is a tough one for me. Okay. There's not enough information for me to formally and responsibly give her the actual diagnosis, but it's clear that she has narcissistic tendencies.
Okay. What points her in that direction?
Yeah, so even the fact that filming herself, I'm a mother, I have children. If one of my children stopped speaking to me, the last thing that I would think to do would be to film myself on camera crying about it and talking about me. I would be focused on my child's pain and what caused them so much pain to get them to want to stop talking to me. So the focus on self and self-importance that this mother had certainly was a tendency. So the focus on herself, filming herself. She also viewed herself as the victim of her daughter, right? Mm-hmm. So that is very in alignment with somebody with a narcissistic personality type. You know, when I in the very, very beginning, when it mentions why the daughter sort of cut her off, on that particular video, it said that she felt gaslit and guilt tripped, and that her relationship with her parents was affecting her mental health. So, you know, I didn't get to hear more from the daughter of like, what do you mean by gaslit? Right. But that is a trigger word, and a word that is associated with narcissists, where they completely deny reality. Almost, I mean, a lot of narcissists grow up in pretty rough environments, and you know, kind of an every man for himself or herself environment, which is why they sort of create their own reality, because the reality that they know is too painful. And so gaslighting is when you actually deny what is happening right now. It would be like if I would to say, Isaiah, you and I are not talking right now. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm at the store. I mean, a complete denial of what's happening. And so daughter references being gaslit. I can't verify if she's just using the word, like so many people use the word incorrectly, but it's certainly a trigger word. So the fact that it got so bad that she felt gaslit and that her mental health was being affected kind of leans me in the direction that maybe she is a narcissist. You know, mom was minimizing this estrangement, like, well, it's because of our political differences, which you know, that made a lot of therapists have a booming practice. Just the whole, you know, ever since COVID, and you know, the political energy out there is so toxic. And if you don't agree with people, they cut you off. And so, but her mom sort of condensed this to, you know, it's our political differences. And my daughter said, if I continue to support that guy, you know, that she wouldn't have me in her life anymore. Those focusing on herself, making it all about her, you know, and not seemingly interested in her daughter's pain, like more curiosity, but why is your daughter so hurt? I didn't pick up on that. Right. So that was the part that was narcissistic. The part that wasn't, her desire for reconnection. So, you know, when you understand narcissism, if you are not feeding their supply, they really have no use for you, right? So daughter was no longer feeding mom's supply. In fact, she was depleting her supply because she cut her off. So she's hurting her sense of self and importance and validation and all of that. And typically, when you're no longer feeding their supply, they have no use for you. So the fact that the mom had this strong of a desire for reconnection was throwing me off. The level of emotion that she was showing was kind of swaying me, going, okay, maybe she's not a narcissist. She was very persistent in spite of her daughter hurting her. She wasn't as protective or sort of defensive as you would expect from a narcissist. I'm like, fine, you're gonna hurt my ego, I'm done with you. That's what they do, they discard. So she seems to show some capacity to consider her daughter's feelings, so that's the part that was confusing, and her emotional depth. So it was like, okay, here's factors that sort of align with narcissism, and here's ones that don't. And so if I'm being asked to diagnose her, I would not be able to give her the actual pathological narcissistic personality disorder type, just based on the fact that there's some contradictions there.
Yeah, and I appreciate the nuance that you approach with that. And of course, you know, I'm not asking you to, you know, not being her therapist or anything like that, give her a formal diagnosis, but your thoughts are really fascinating, and I appreciate how thorough you are in considering these different factors. I guess one point of curiosity that I wanted to bring up is, as I was looking through the DSM criteria for a narcissistic personality disorder, this is my devil's advocate for everybody in the comments. It says, you know, she's a narcissist and it's very common and all. By a lot of those definitions, I feel like you could diagnose a lot of teenagers as narcissists. So how do we figure that out? Like, what's the difference there?
I think we do have to consider, you know, phase of life and developmental level, right? And so you're right. I mean, there's egocentric phases, and certainly teenagers almost all unilaterally fit into that category of I don't really care about others. I'm the only one that matters.
Sure.
You have to consider developmental sort of phase. So tendencies: be selfish, materialistic, lack of sensitivity to other people's feelings, blaming others. It becomes diagnosable though when the behaviors reach a problematic level where it actually impairs a person's daily life, whether it be in the form of their sense of self, their relationships, their career, or their financial or legal standing. And so I guess that's my way of trying to make that clear distinction is, okay, there's tendencies, but if it's reaching the level, problematic level, where it's actually impairing a person's daily life. And so over time, you know, whether somebody has tendencies or whether they actually qualify, you'll see that level of problematic behaviors. And if it's causing that many problems, safe to say that the person has that personality type.
And and I was just playing a little devil's advocate there because I think that we can be very quick to throw around that label. But again, like with the DSM, we specify that, you know, it has to be in multiple environments over an extended period of time, which is also why I was very uncomfortable saying that she might have been a narcissist, because I'm seeing her in one snapshot in one piece of social media.
Exactly. But she definitely had enough sort of markers where it makes you question.
Absolutely.
And for her, you know, for anyone to cut off a family member, they have to be in so much pain. They have to tell themselves, my life is better off without this person in it. It's causing me that much pain. And to do that with a parent or a sibling should give anyone pause as to what has gone on in that person's life or in this person's relationship for it to reach that level where they feel better off without the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the final question is kind of, as we talk about, like you said, narcissism is a term that's used very commonly now, and it's kind of crossed that barrier into being colloquial in its usage. With a lot of people identifying others in their lives as narcissists, I guess this is a two-part question. Is it really that common? And if it's not, how can we make a better distinction between the clinical and the common usage of the term?
It is that common. You know, and let me say this too. I have learned so much of what I know from one of the most world-renowned, she's a clinical psychologist, Dr. Ramani, is somebody who has devoted her entire career to narcissism, and a lot of what I have learned has come from her, so I have to give her a nod credit there. You're asking specifically, like, you know, the colloquial versus clinical. So, you know, lots of people have tendencies, like we've said, being selfish, being materialistic, lack of sensitivity to other people's feelings, blaming others. For people to know the difference is to, I guess it's only going to be over time.
Okay.
And consistency, and saying, okay, one of the there's like tests, there's actual resources out there that say, hey, if you're wondering if you're in a narcissistic relationship, you can do a test. And one of the tests is having the narcissist ask you to do something for them and just simply saying no. And watch the level of frustration and irritation and aggravation they have. What do you mean no? They don't handle that well. What separates, I think, clinically versus colloquially is capacity. I am not capable of taking accountability for what I'm doing or saying or what happens. I cannot do it. I cannot see my own sense of self and being responsible in what happens. It's a capacity thing. So they can't apologize. They may to try to win you back, but they don't actually ever feel a sense of accountability. And then the lack of empathy, the lack of any regard for your feelings, ability to have compassion for your feelings, they just can't do it. So those I tend to just keep at the forefront of, these are the markers for you to understand the difference between someone who has tendencies and somebody who's pathological.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very helpful. And I do hope that, you know, this video and your interview and the awesome information that you're giving can be part of the education that helps people have more awareness about, you know, how we label people, like you talked about earlier, being careful about how we see people based on the way that we talk about them. So thank you so much for being a part of that education.
No, thank you. I mean, people become so wounded from these kinds of relationships. And so that's why I'm doing it, is if I can help people at least recognize it or help protect themselves from it, then, I'm happy to be part of it. That's my only motivation or intention here. It's just to help protect people, help them protect themselves.
Yeah. And in that vein, I guess, like, if somebody's watching this and maybe they start recognizing that pattern that you're talking about, maybe between the codependent and the narcissist, or maybe they just recognize that somebody in their lives is maybe a little too self-absorbed or a little too much on the narcissistic tendencies for them, what would you suggest that they do about that?
I would suggest that they for sure consult with a specialist in the area. And I mean, I think most mental health professionals have some understanding, but almost look for somebody who specializes. Like I'm being a marriage and family therapist, I sort of work in a systemic fashion. So I focus my studies on relationships, and studying sort of in depth the systemic nature of families and in depth understanding how relationships work. So consulting with a mental health professional, and trying to talk with this particular relative first. I mean, I'm a big proponent of family. I think family is everything, and trying to exhaust options. I mean, even right now in my work as a clinician, I've got at least a dozen children of narcissistic parents, adult children of narcissistic parents. And, they report very similar feelings, never feeling good enough, and constantly sort of caught in this never-ending sort of cycle of achievement. And if I keep raising the bar on, performance and achievement, that I can get my narcissistic parent to approve of me, and I can sort of win them over, and I never, ever, ever actually get there. And so I even try, because they still want, as hurtful as a narcissistic parent is, they still want them in their lives. And so it's trying to talk to this narcissistic parent, say like, hey, when this happened, I was really hurt. This really bothered me, and sort of see if they have some capacity to show regard for your feelings. And each case is different. And I do have to say too, each degree of narcissism is different. They're not always the same. I would put it like 1 through 10. And people that are at a level 10, there's not much hope to sustain any kind of relationship, but people are at other degrees, so it does have to be handled case by case. So it's consulting with somebody who understands narcissism, and really, trying to talk to this particular family member and see what their capacity is, how far can you get. You'll know pretty quickly if that individual family member has the ability to have any regard for your feelings. And if they repeatedly show they just can't, then it becomes, I have to position myself in the relationship, have very firm boundaries, keep them at a distance in order to protect myself from being harmed any further.
If you all enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe. We have a lot of other awesome guests on our podcast, so all of you are instrumental to making that happen. So thank you all for your engagement, for your support, and I'm really excited for this opportunity to learn. So thank you so much for joining me today.